Well, hello everyone. My name is Eunice Garcia, and I am the Executive Director of the Youth Coalition for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. And I am very happy about welcoming you today, all of you, to this amazing panel that we have put together for the CSW with the Center for Reproductive Rights and the amazing panelists that we have today with us. Just before we begin, some notes about the logistics. There is interpretation like Spanish, French, and International Sign Language available. So if you go to the bottom of the screen and you click on interpretation, there is a symbol that you will see that is kind of like a world symbol. And you can click there and you can select the interpretation that we have. Okay, so right before we start, we also want to make some notes about the importance of this topic for this year's agenda of the CSW, which is climate and environment, well, climate justice and gender equality. And well, we know that climate and environmental crises and disasters can curtail the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls when goods and devices are limited or unavailable, owing to the destruction of infrastructure, roads, clinics in rural and remote areas in particular. Entrenched gender discrimination compounds the risk of young women and adolescent girls and gender diverse persons. Fulfilling the right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health is fundamental to building the resilience of women and girls. Climate change, environmental degradation, and disasters have differential gender health effects, including on sexual and reproductive health and rights, and exacerbate existing gender gaps in access to and outcomes of healthcare. Strengthening healthcare systems and service delivery by incorporating disaster risk reduction is critical. Similarly, important are policies and programs that increase access to and the availability of sexual and reproductive health services and information, extend psychosocial support during and after disasters, and prevent increased risk of child marriage, and provide essential services for the prevention of response to and recovery from sexual and gender-based violence. Of course, there are several recommendations that have been made on this topic, and as for what the young people have been requesting, it is very important to include youth leadership in the fight for climate justice and gender equality. And I think that this topic is very linked to what we're going to be discussing today, especially because we have here different young people that are going to be sharing their expertise on comprehensive sexuality education, and they will be sharing with you some insights of their work in this agenda. Right before we start, I also want to mention a little bit how are we going to do this today, what's like our agenda for today. So we have 3 sections this morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. The first one, we're gonna have a discussion that is going to be 100% youth-led. For this, we have invited 3 amazing panelists from the Global South. We have representation from Latin America, Asia Pacific, and Africa here with us. Then we're gonna have another section where our colleagues from the Center for Reproductive Rights are going to discuss some findings of their work around comprehensive sexuality education. And by the end of the panel, right at the end, we're gonna have Dr. Carla Bertichewski from Mexico, from the National Center of Gender Equity and Reproductive Health of Mexico, and she's gonna be giving some closing remarks. Now, now that I've given you a little overview of the agenda, we also want to mention the importance of this event and the way it has been structured for us, at least as the Youth Coalition. It has been an amazing experience partnering with the Center for Reproductive Rights and being able to shape the format of this panel to allow the voices of young people to have a predominant participation in this panel as a way of shifting the power dynamics that affect young people's participation and leadership. So now that we have done that, I want to start by saying that Young advocates and activists and sex educators from the Global South are going to take the stage in order to discuss the work that they do in their communities and the support that they would need from stakeholders in order to guarantee comprehensive sexuality education for all. Okay, well, this is going to happen while specifically addressing the challenges that young people face when trying to access information about sexual orientation and gender identity, the colonial and anti-racist practices of comprehensive sexual education, pleasure and consent, and relationships. And now I'm gonna give the floor to Sofia from Mexico. Sofia Regalado, we're super excited about having her here. Sofia Regalado began her activism work at the age of 12 years old. In 2016, she co-founded the organization Morras Help Morras, which she co-directs to the date. Since 2017, she has been advising women and pregnant people who decide to have an abortion in contexts of vulnerability and criminalization. In 2019, she completed her bachelor's degree in philosophy with the thesis Abortion, Women, and Power. She carries out strategic litigation in favor of sexual and reproductive rights, and she's a workshop leader in peripheral Aguascalientes neighborhoods using strategies based on the imbrication of oppressions and harm reduction models. She is currently a consultant and analyst on fundamentalisms. We have invited Sofia today to showcase the importance of deeply understanding the context of young people and putting their voices at the center in the design of CSE program. Sophie, please tell us how did Morras Help Morras began its CSE programming approach, and how has it evolved to address the actual concerns and needs of young people living in the periphery of cities? Over to you, Sophie.
Hola, buen día a todos. Bueno, quisiera comenzar diciendo que todos queremos cambiar al mundo y todos tenemos buenas intenciones. Sin embargo, es importante entender bien el contexto en el que nos encontramos. Voy a platicar un poco de nuestro ejemplo y vaya, nuestro trabajo siempre estuvo dirigido a las periferias de la ciudad, en Aguascalientes, México. Nosotras damos talleres de derechos sexuales y reproductivos utilizando el reggaetón como una herramienta para hablar de sexualidad, de placer y de consentimiento. Ahora, por otra parte, comenzamos también acompañando a mujeres y a personas gestantes que decidieron abortar y, bueno, a implementar también estos talleres. Sin embargo, sucedió algo muy interesante y es que observamos que en las periferias rechazaban nuestro proyecto de aborta segura, que era el de acompañar a mujeres y personas gestantes. Y el ejemplo más concreto del rechazo que enfrentamos fue cuando nos dijeron las mismas chicas jóvenes de las periferias, nos dijeron que no querían nuestro pañuelo verde, haciendo apología a la marea verde que fue un boom en Latinoamérica a partir de 2018, más o menos. Nos dijeron que no querían nuestro pañuelo verde porque para ellas significaba o daba el mensaje de que nosotras no queríamos que sus hijos nacieran. ¿Por qué? Porque para ellas la verdadera lucha y la verdadera resistencia era poder parir y que no las esterilizaran sin su consentimiento. Esa era su lucha. Entonces, ¿qué pasó? ¿O cuál fue el mensaje para nosotras? Fue escuchar y entender qué es lo que estaba pasando. Más allá de nosotras creer que teníamos la solución para lo que nosotras veíamos como un problema. Ahora, ¿qué hicimos entonces? Lo primero que hicimos fue reflexionar sobre el contexto en el que viven los jóvenes de las periferias de la ciudad. También nos dimos cuenta que para muchas chicas el embarazo adolescente era una herramienta de emancipación y no un problema, como se les suele tratar con bastante frecuencia. Vimos que para ellas, en muchas ocasiones o casos, era más viable embarazarse para independizarse y no tener que cargar, digamos, con los cuidados de muchas personas en su casa y ahora cargar con los cuidados de dos personas, es decir, su hija y su pareja. Entonces, eso creo que es muy interesante porque también nos llevó a pensar que había problemáticas que los jóvenes enfrentan que van mucho más allá de las preocupaciones del feminismo blanco. ¿Por qué? Porque parece de pronto que para el feminismo blanco el único problema es el género y no es así. Creo que eso es muy importante de notar. Y bueno, reflexionando acerca de las problemáticas que van más allá del feminismo blanco, que tampoco se trata de poner una especie de unidad medidora, pero sí creo que hay problemáticas que pueden ser mucho más importantes en ciertos contextos y dentro de las cuales nosotras encontramos, por ejemplo, problemas con el uso de sustancias psicoactivas, violencia, perdón, violencia estructural, esterilizaciones forzadas, violencia obstétrica y militarización, por poner algunos ejemplos de problemáticas que van más allá de las preocupaciones del feminismo blanco. Ahora, ¿qué otra cosa hicimos? Bueno, desarrollar estrategias desde la imbricación de opresiones, es decir, tomando en cuenta que el mundo es racista, es clasista, es colonialista, es capacitista. Tomar esto en cuenta es importante porque nos permite no solo, insisto, tomar al género como el único problema, sino darnos cuenta que la realidad es muchísimo más compleja, incluso si solo queremos hablar de derechos sexuales y reproductivos. Ahora, ¿por qué es importante que hablemos de estas cosas? Bueno, insisto en que las problemáticas van más allá de la blanquitud, que la realidad es mucho más compleja que eso, que hay que entender el contexto completo y no, digamos, aislar a los jóvenes para hablar de un solo tema, sino que hay que entender que la realidad es como un todo y ver qué podemos hacer con ese todo. Entonces, bueno, aquí concluyo mi participación. Espero no haberme llevado demasiado tiempo. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Sophie. Thank you very much for your intervention. I think that as you can see, the work of Morras Help Morras is very important for the youth agenda. And actually, we really enjoy working with them and see what they have to say. Some notes on what Sophie has, of what Sophie has addressed today. For example, I would like to say that it is very important to put bodily autonomy in the center of the strategies of comprehensive sexuality education, because the problematic of young people around the world are very different. Many people think that young people are like this monolithic group, and we're not this monolithic group. Like, there are so many complexities and issues around our lives, and we are very diverse. So it is very important. Thank you so much, Sophie, for all of these that you have shared with us. And now I'm gonna go to Saya from Nepal. Saya is a public health graduate and is passionate about young people's sexual and reproductive health and rights. Her advocacy and engagement specifically focuses on comprehensive sexuality education, where she has experience providing CSE to young people as a peer educator, as well as advocating at the policymaking level. At regional and international levels, Saya has advocated for young people's SRHR at Asia Pacific Forum of Sustainable Development, at Asia Pacific Population Conference, at the Nairobi Summit. Saya brings in the expertise of facing and addressing adult gatekeepers' stigma towards CSE and in delivering youth-led and youth-centered CSE. Saya, please tell us a little bit about how did you become a CSE peer educator, and what are young people's interests around CSE? What are the main barriers that young people face when trying to implement CSE programming? Over to you.
Thank you, firstly. So I started working for comprehensive sexuality education back in 2016 as part of this Youth Activist Leadership Council. So honestly, before being part of that council, I had very little idea of what CSE was. And being part of that council, initially I was very skeptical about CSE, will it be effective or not, So that is how I started. But once I became part of the council and started working for young people's comprehensive sexuality education, providing them CSE, I learned that young people are very interested to, they have so many queries about themselves. They have queries from contraception to masturbation to menstruation. So it really made me learn that they are very willing to learn about their bodies, about themselves, So that is something that I took away, and that also helped me reflect upon my own journey growing up, how I was uncomfortable in my body, how I was unprepared for when I menstruated for the first time, how I was ill prepared to cope with the emotional changes that took place. So reflecting, I feel like if I had been provided with CSE, I would have become a more confident individual growing up. That's what I felt. And I think that is the time when I really started feeling deeply for CSE as an approach, and that it has power to shape lives of young people. So I started working more on CSE, and I started working at policymaking level, where I advocated for CSE, especially as part of the Right Here, Right Now project, where I advocated at the national policymaking level to incorporate components of CSE in school curricula. I was also part of this drafting committee where I was involved in formulating the national CSE monitoring framework. So yeah, with over the time, I also with the work I did, there was also multiple barriers and challenges. Having worked at the grassroots level as well as at the policy making level, there was one very common barrier that was people's mindset. It was very difficult for us to shift to bring change in people's mindset, and that is something that I've faced throughout. So while working as a peer educator in schools, it was very difficult for us to get permission from schools. They have this prejudice around CSE, and the teachers were really concerned. They were reluctant to give permission because they felt that if they provided us the permission to do the CSE sessions, that would make young people more willing or to initiate sexual activity early. So that was the myth they hold. So they clearly denied us multiple times. So that was some barrier that we faced. While at the policy making level, what we faced is that the policymakers positioned to formulate policies and curricula, they didn't have any idea of what CSE was. They didn't know the importance of CSE. They hold the same myth around CSE, so they didn't endorse CSE at all. So that was the major barrier. And additionally, there was no spaces at all for civil society organization to participate in this curriculum making process. And young people, they were nowhere to be found. There were no space for young people. And this is something this makes me wonder over and over, because how can curriculum cater young people when we are not part of the discussion? So that is why I think in Nepal, the curriculum is not working. It is not catering young people and their needs around CSE. And we along the time we also worked and did a research on CSE teachers training, because there is so much conversation going on around teachers, how they're not teaching the CSE curricula and how they're skipping the chapters. We really wanted to learn more about their experiences. So interestingly, the skipping portion of the chapters, the not teaching part, was actually an outcome of certain set of barriers that they were facing. For instance, we talked with one of the teacher who identified themselves as women. She shared that she was very much willing to teach CSE to her students, and she really realized the importance of CSE. However, she was very concerned of how society would view her if she taught CSE to young people. She was very concerned how the male teachers would view her as a teacher. And also she was very concerned about her students having a different perspective towards her, because for students in Nepal, it is still very new. They're not used to teachers openly teaching CSE openly. So that is something she shared, and she was really concerned about. And I think moving forward is very important for us as stakeholders, for us as for all the stakeholders, including adult gatekeepers, to create this enabling environment where students and teachers are able to confidently learn and teach CSE, and they're able to feel comfortable, be it by investing in resources or providing better infrastructures or information. So I think that is very important. Also, lastly, it is very important to engage parents in the whole discourse, and so I think I like to end it here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Saya. So many things that I would like to highlight from your intervention. I think that, for example, building young people's confidence around sexuality is key for them to be assertive in the decisions that they make. And I feel like loving ourselves is the best tool to understand ourselves. Therefore, there is like a huge importance of approaching sexuality education as something positive, and not only from a prevention approach, right? Like, for example, like teenage pregnancy or STIs. Abstinence and fear approaches must stop. People can't build confidence when there is a whole society shaming us for being sexual beings. And this is something that another young sex educator from Montreal, who's based in Mexico City, also mentioned last year at this, like at the CSW as well. And there is also this question around, like, what are we doing to target adults? Right? What are we doing to target the parents? What are we doing to target the teachers? What are we doing to target decision makers that don't understand what CSE is? What are we doing to target religious leaders? And how are we supporting young people to face the opposition? Because in many occasions, the CSE approach and the policy is always targeting young people, but who is targeting the adults that are preventing us from accessing CSE? I think that's the question. And now I'm gonna move to Amanda. Amanda Banura is the former country coordinator of the International Youth Alliance for Family Planning and the co-founder and executive director of the Uganda Youth Alliance for Family Planning and Adolescent Health. She also served as a representative in the Youth Advisory Group that oversaw the organization of the 2017 Family Planning Summit in London, and she is currently a member of the Youth Advisory Board for the Scissors Project. She is the vice chairperson of the board of directors at the Straight Talk Foundation Uganda and the FP 2030 Youth Focal Point for Uganda. Amanda has a lot of experience at the forefront battle for the recognition of comprehensive sexuality education in Uganda. Amanda, please talk about the context of the fight for CSE in Uganda. What was the role of young people in this fight and the impact of their actions? And what are the main obstacles that young advocates face when trying to access and advocate for CSE? Over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Eunice. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I used to say my name is Amanda Banura, and I'm sorry my voice is a bit hoarse. I'm dealing with a cold, and hope you can hear me well. Thank you, Eunice. So with the journey on CSE in Uganda has been a long one, back and forth. It started in 2016 when organizations partnered with adult-led organizations to form a coalition that was called Right Here, Right Now. It was a 5-year project. And one of the objectives for this coalition or network was to have or to add the government to put in place a comprehensive sexuality education framework for Uganda. But way before that, back in the 2000 or 2010, government had banned CSE in Uganda in schools, and this meant that schools were no longer able to have sexuality education or education on sexuality in schools. And it meant that young people were not going to know about their reproductive health in school. Young people were not going to know about their anatomy, body anatomy. They are not going to know about their body shape. That is part of CSE. And when it got banned, we had to come into, we needed action. And we need to take action. So we joined this network. We formed this network Right Here, Right Now in 2016. And we started our work from then until 2017. We came up, we had the parliamentarians or the policy makers, legislators in our country form up the National Sexuality Education Framework. Now, this was set to launch in 2017, and everything was set. We had done consultations from all sectors. We had consulted with the private sector, we had consulted with the medical sector, public and private. We had consulted religious leaders and cultural leaders. Now, on the day of the launch, we had invited the Minister of Education, who is also the First Lady of the country, Uganda, and she was the one to launch National Sexuality Education Framework. But after a while, just there within the event of the launch, she declared that the document we had was not going to be launched. That was like a blow to us after all the hard work we had put into, and we started asking or probing what the problem was. The problem was because in our CSE framework or the policy document that we're presenting, it was going to promote immorality among children in schools, which was not the case because they had their own interpretation, which was not ours. So we still did not work. We joined together with another partner who was with us in the coalition, Center for Human Rights Development, CEHAD, and the government to court. That was still in 2017. November, and earlier in 2019, government, the judiciary led by the Justice Lydia Mugambe came up and actually asked the minister to remove the ban, to lift the ban. So the ban on CSE was lifted after a long struggle in Uganda. And we've been again in consultations back and forth with religious leaders, cultural leaders, because those are biggest opposers of the work that we do. And we have at least a green light now that the CSE in Uganda is going to be reinstated, and that means that children now in school can get now to know about their sexuality. They can learn their body anatomy, they can learn about reproductive health. And meanwhile, in the gap that we did not have the CSE in place, we've seen a rise in teenage pregnancies. We've seen a rise in addictions. When it comes to boys, they're addicted to drugs, and once they're addicted, they're the very people who the very culprits who come and impregnate the girls, and they do all sorts of crime because they are not empowered, and that empowerment comes from school. Parents, we are talking to their children at home, so they leave the responsibilities to the teachers. That's why we needed a CSE in place to make sure that information that is not got at home can still be got at school, and the children are balanced in terms of information access when it comes to comprehensive sexuality. And we also engaged religious leaders and cultural leaders because they play a key role in terms of influencing opinions. They are opinion leaders. What a religious leader, cultural leader says is fine. So we needed them on board and they had to be part. It's still a journey that must say that we still have to continue because we have one opinion leader join us once, and then when they change position, we have someone different and they come with their own opinions. So what I can say for Uganda, we're making headway, and it's still a struggle that we must continue. And what helped us was a joint effort, a concerted effort between adult allies and youth-led organizations, because we said you can't have a policy for young people without the young people, nothing for us with us. So it had to be joint. We had to do it together. And when we were presenting our last position paper after the ban that led to the court actually ordering the lift of the ban, it was a young person who presented that, and we presented the strong reasons why we needed it, and that's how we saw it, the lift of the ban now of CSE in Uganda. Thank you, Nise. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And I think that I would like to highlight from your intervention the importance, of course, of, again, like targeting adult gatekeepers, of targeting the religious leaders, because this is a situation that I think that we all face. And with colonialism, I think that we have all faced like the impacts of colonialism, of religion, of religious leaders' narratives that are really not good for young people. And I think that it is also important to mention that accountability can be also youth-friendly, right? Like there are like so many ways of young people to adopt like these accountability models and to hold like adults accountable, that it doesn't really have to be always confrontative. It can be like through the dialogue, it can be through listening to each other, like through intergenerational dialogues. And that is very important, because very often when we ask to develop enabling environments or to co-design enabling environments for young people to be able to participate in decision making of CSE, which includes accountability models, there is like this backlash, right? Like there is this fear of like giving the power to young people to hold adults accountable, and it shouldn't be that way. Now, I want to ask you, like the three of you, one question, well, two questions, very quickly. I would like all the panelists to share your thoughts on what do you need adult gatekeepers to do to support young people's comprehensive sexuality education, and how can they be good allies and respect young people's needs and leadership? I'm gonna pass the mic first to Sophie.
Gracias. Yo creo que además de ser escuchadas, que eso es algo que decimos todo el tiempo, que los jóvenes necesitamos ser escuchados, pero más allá de eso, tal vez diría que los adultos adquieran un compromiso real con nosotros, que se garanticen los acuerdos que se toman, por ejemplo, y que exista una verdadera apertura a escuchar qué es lo que hacemos, pero además a apostarle a líderes jóvenes como nosotros, a perderle un poco el miedo a ello, ¿no? Y en este sentido también agregaría que hace falta que los adultos honestamente aprendan de nosotros, de estos nuevos contextos, pero además de estas nuevas estrategias que a veces pueden ser un poco locas, ¿no? Pero que terminan funcionando. Entonces, eso, además de escucharnos, adquirir compromisos reales con nosotros y además garantizarlos. Eso diría.
Muchas gracias, Sophie. Saya, over to you. What are your thoughts on these questions?
Yeah, like Sophie shared, I think commitment is very important from adult gatekeepers, but as well as that, I mean, additionally, I also feel that, you know, as adult gatekeepers and as young people, we both need to learn that we are in this together. It's not like us against them. It's like we all are in this together, and a sense of solidarity and commitment is required if we want every young person to have access to CSE. And like Eunice, you said, who are holding adult gatekeepers accountable. I think in that part as well, I think those who are already in this movement of of allowing young people to have more access to CSE, I think those adult gatekeepers have a responsibility to get in more adults to be part of this movement, to share it within their networks, beyond their networks, so that it creates this environment where everyone is willing to take up their own responsibility to have to get more accessibility for young people. And also, I think, providing spaces for young people, meaningful spaces for young people to lead and to discourse on CSE, and, more funding for youth-led initiatives and research initiatives and programs on CSE is very crucial. I think these are some of the things I think that is required.
Thank you so much, Saya. Amanda, over to you. What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you so much, Eunice. Just to add on Saja and Sophia's input, our role as young people is to work, because we are young, and yes, we might be knowing what is good for us as young people, but we need the help of the adult allies. They've been there longer. So what they need to do as adult allies is to give us the opportunity, because this is our time. We are the future of today. And it's us who know what is really, what our needs are. The situations have changed, trends have changed. Their time is not the same as ours, but we can work together to create harmony in the work that we do. We can both be gatekeepers because we know how it before and how it looks now, and we can both come up with a situation, with a solution to the problem. But if they listen to us, because it is now and today, and we are here now and today, so they give us an equal opportunity, listen to us when we sit on the table, let us sit together and talk. Not only should they hear us talk, but they should listen and take into action what we present, or our comments and ideas that we present on the table. Most of the times they say they give us opportunities, but when they put us on the table and we give our ideas, they are left on the table, and they continue with their plans. But they should give us the opportunities and take on our ideas. Let them trust us, if I might say, let them trust us to see that our solutions actually work. And if they don't work, they can always come back and consult. We can always advise each other and say, okay, this, you guys, the young people brought this idea, it did not work out this way, so how best can we turn it around? And in that dialoguing and working together is how we can really make this possible. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you so much. I think that on the Youth Coalition side, I would like to add that young people have a lot of resilience, and young people are, like, especially young people from the Global South, are experts in finding solutions for issues that are there and that are not going to be solved by anyone else. So I think that on my side, I would like to highlight the importance of funding youth-led initiatives, because often young people are the ones being super creative. For example, like the initiatives that we have heard from Saya, from Amanda, and from Sophie, like how do we use different tools to approach our peers? How do we understand each other? And there are so many initiatives that I have seen lately from young sex educators that are promoting Sexciting or other forms of sex education that allows young people to explore their pleasure within like very controlled environments and like consents. And we have these difficult conversations that we're not having in schools, that we're not having with regular programming. So for me, it would be fund youth-led initiatives. That's something that I always say. Thank you so much for your participation, Amanda, Sophie, and Saya. Now, I would like to share some amazing things that we have been doing on Twitter. I'm going to share my screen so that you can all see some of the responses that we have received from in our Twitter dynamics that we have been having this week. before this event. So let me share my screen. Okay, so we have some participants from different countries in our Twitter account. We made these questions. How was your sexuality education and what was missing from it? And we have 2 participants saying, my sex ed was lacking conversations about pleasure, intimate partner violence, and not cis heteronormative relationships. I wish there had been way more of that and that I had learned about these things sooner. There's another person saying yes to all of this. I got comprehensive information about STIs, pregnancy and contraception, but at no time did anyone mention anything except like PIV and oral or anything about same-sex relationships. We also asked, what are the obstacles that you face in your CSE activism as a young person? And we received these responses. Adultocentric systems, you're too young to be considered an expert on the field, so we cannot follow your recommendations. Yes, we have heard that too. I don't know if you have heard that, Saya, Sofia, and Amanda. Lack of collaboration, media attention, and of course resources. As a grassroots nonprofit workers, we don't have enough access to funding, and it really affects our project timeline and milestones. Insufficient and piecemeal funding for CSE, lack of coordination. Oh, I cannot see. Give me 1 second. Lack of coordination of the various efforts by local governments and young and development partners, inadequate system for monitoring and evaluation due on CSE. Curriculum implementation challenges included, I am sorry, I cannot read everything. Inadequate, I guess, when integrated in other subject adaptation of the curriculum. Okay, I cannot read this one, so I'm gonna read the one that is below. Retrogressive cultures that still view sexuality education as taboo, hence making it difficult to have these conversations with young people. And we also had the question on what gives you the hope to continue the work that you're doing on CSE. And people have responded, contribute to the reduction of prejudices and myths related to sexuality, and also the popularization of the application of contraceptive methods in order to reduce the prevalence of unwanted pregnancies and also sexuality transmitted infections, particularly in Africa. We have, if adolescent girls are given the accurate age-appropriate sex ed, then they will be able to make informed decisions and choices, which will in turn reduce the alarming cases of SRHR-related issues. Reproductive health problems such as HIV, unwanted pregnancy, and unsafe abortion among adolescents are closely linked to insufficient knowledge about sexuality and reproduction, and the need to end early and unwanted pregnancies, which will lead to unsafe abortion, hence death, and the need to reduce the stigma among the youth and increase access to health. Yeah, and we're gonna have more questions soon. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so now that we have seen like a little bit about the dynamics that we have been having throughout the week, I want to pass the mic to 2 other colleagues. Oftentimes, many countries lack policies that facilitate access to CSE and that establish accountability mechanisms for implementation. When such policies exist, they are non-comprehensive and mostly focus on abstention or limited concepts related to sexual and reproductive health and rights. They also do not take into consideration the diversity of young people and tailor their outreach strategies accordingly. Using examples from Latin America and Africa, this session aims to show the role of legal and policy frameworks in facilitating or restricting access to CSE. Now I'm gonna introduce Lita Martinez, who is the Executive Director of CEPAM, Guayaquil. Lita is from Ecuador. She's a feminist lawyer and activist for the rights of girls, adolescents, and women. Her first academic and professional training is a social worker, having as main work the social development of groups in situations of vulnerability, with emphasis on children, adolescents, and women. Following that same purpose, she obtained her JD. On January 28, 2020, she presented oral arguments as a part of the defense in the case Paola Guzmán Albarracín et al. Versus Ecuador before the Inter-American Human Rights Court. We're also going to have Betty Odalo, who's the Senior Technical Advisor for Africa from the Center for Reproductive Rights. Betty, with 10 years of experience working on reproductive rights and good governance, undertakes the legal and policy research and analysis of reproductive rights issues. Betty leads the development and implementation of advocacy strategies, including on adolescent SRHR at international and regional levels, and across several countries in Africa, including Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, and Zambia. Her work extends to African human rights and political mechanisms, including the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the African Committee of Experts on the Right of the Child, and the African Union Peace and Security Council, where she supports efforts to articulate government's responsibilities to protect sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and adolescents, including those in humanitarian settings. She has published on topics including gender-responsive budgeting and diverse women's and adolescent access to comprehensive and dignified reproductive healthcare. And at least on my end, I can say that Betty is an amazing ally for young people. So now that we have you here, I would like to ask two questions for you, for Lita and Betty. What role can policy play in facilitating access? Well, first I'm gonna make one. What role can policy play in facilitating access to CSE to all for both in and out of school young people? And I don't know if you can give some examples of this. I'm gonna pass the mic to Lita first. Welcome, Lita.
Hola, hola, buenos días. Un gusto con todas, con todes. Luego de escuchar todas las experiencias de las y de los jóvenes, sin duda alguna hay muchas cosas que nos entrelazan. Yo diría que para pensar en definir o establecer el papel que desempeñan las políticas públicas de acceso a educación integral en sexualidad, se precisa justamente que reconozcamos que hay diversas dimensiones que debemos observar y asegurar para que tanto la definición como la implementación de la política pública tenga ese efecto transformador deseado. Y ahí, en ese sentido, si analizamos también el rol del placer, de la autonomía progresiva, de la capacidad de decidir libremente cómo vivir la sexualidad, de contar con información adecuada, oportuna, científicamente construida, vemos que todas estas confluyen o son la fuente del fortalecimiento psicosocial y por lo tanto queda claro el aporte de la política, el aporte en la construcción de interacciones sanas, libres de masculinidades tóxicas, y estamos hablando también en ese sentido de la capacidad de abordar, de intervenir frente a las diversas violencias desde los espacios comunitarios de escucha, de manejo de conflictos, desde el cumplimiento y la existencia de rutas expeditas y socializadas para la denuncia, para la judicialización y también para la intervención integral y especializada en casos de violencia de género. También es desde estas dimensiones que es necesario no dejar de ver que en nuestro país, en el Ecuador y en varios o en la mayoría de los países de la región y del mundo, tenemos frente a nosotras también entornos educativos formales y populares en donde hay ejercicios y prácticas cotidianas afianzadas, sostenidas en privilegios, en relaciones de poder implícitas por las jerarquías sociales urbanas, de género, de racialización, de edad, de condición física, que nos siguen colocando a las mujeres en condición de subordinación y a las y les jóvenes también en condición de subordinación. Sin embargo, creo que también es preciso reconocer que asistimos a la presencia de un activismo juvenil cada vez más crítico, que coloca como prioridad, lo tiene muy claro, eso no lo teníamos hace algunos años, la claridad en la salud, en los derechos sexuales y reproductivos, en el derecho a tener una vida libre de violencia, de discriminación, sin opresión ni individual ni colectiva. Siguiendo esa misma lógica, el alcance también del concepto de ciudadanía se va interpelando y por lo tanto hace parte de las demandas de educación integral en sexualidad. Y yo creo que es ahí quizá desde esta perspectiva que cobra fuerza el rol de la política pública de educación integral en sexualidad al intersectarse con todas las realidades particulares de las niñas, de los niños, de las adolescentes y jóvenes como parte de un todo, pero también como parte de esta sociedad adultocéntrica, discriminatoria y violencia, lo que exige que la política pública entonces, para tener este rol transformador, esté construida desde la apuesta feminista, desde el control de la constitucionalidad, del marco normativo en cada uno de nuestros países, pero también desde el control de la convencionalidad que exige y combina a los estados a cumplir ciertos estándares para que puedan decir que están cumpliendo con el derecho a la educación, incorporando totalmente dentro de las mallas y dentro de las currículums la educación integral en sexualidad. Entonces, solamente una política construida desde ahí, desde la experiencia, pero desde el saber de las y de los jóvenes, teniendo en cuenta estas entradas para que le den el sustento necesario, creo que se podría pensar en una política que sea capaz de romper paradigmas y prácticas violentas en el sistema educativo, también en las comunidades, en las ciudades y en los territorios.
Muchas gracias, Lita. Thank you so much for your words. And yes, I really think that young people are rocking the CSE agenda and the SRHR agenda in general. We know that young people have super defined agendas, especially the adolescents. And this is something that is very funny for me because in many occasions there are like other stakeholders that reach out to us and they're like, hey, we want to include adolescents, but it's very complicated because they're adolescents. And I'm like, they have a stronger agenda and they are more organized at the vaccination schemes in all the countries. So no, like adolescents have like an amazing agenda as well. And thank you so much for your intervention, Lita. Now I'm gonna go to Betty. What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you so much, Inise. I'm really enjoying your insights on, on adolescents and their agenda. It's just very interesting to hear, and I really appreciate your thoughts. So hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity, obviously, to share today and to learn also from all the panelists. And I really am learning a lot. And so I guess, Unisa, to answer your question, I just want to start by highlighting one thing, that at the Africa regional level, the characteristics, I guess, of what constitutes CSE are commonly understood from, regional human rights mechanisms. So the African Commission, the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which you mentioned at the center we work with. And they have interpreted information on health as comprising information and education on sex, on sexuality, on HIV, on sexual and reproductive health and rights broadly. And they've also said the information must be evidence-based, fact-based, rights-based, non-judgmental, and understandable in content and in language, a little bit to what Lita was referring to. And we do see laws and policies at national levels in some African countries that are reflecting these regional level provisions and guidance. And they're being implemented to enable us to be able to provide access to CSE at those levels in a variety of ways that perhaps are useful and that help move us towards realizing the real objectives of CSE. So, I mean, this is not a perfect situation. I'll offer some examples of, those gaps, but I just want to answer your question first and just provide some examples where there's been some useful progress. And so the first thing we've seen is that there's laws and policies on CSEs that can enable appropriate access to CSE by fostering an enabling environment for learning. And so we've seen policies that really do emphasize and promote safe learning environments, environments that are supportive of, good levels of interaction and communication, allowing learners to be able to personalize their education and the information that they're receiving so that they can participate, they can interact, they can express themselves freely and openly with, less and less, hopefully, fear of there being consequences of how it is that they interact themselves. Interact among themselves, interact when they're receiving information. But I just have to state that the policies that emphasize safe learning environments have to be accompanied by other policies and actions that are related to child protection, for example, that are related to staff in schools and teachers in schools being very active and very very direct about nurturing and fostering this environment. And in Kenya and Uganda specifically, we have seen and our partners have documented, the lack of being able to achieve the most supportive environments because of these missing pieces when it comes to implementation of these policies. And the second example that I'd like to share is that we've seen laws and policies being able to enable continued delivery of CSE when conventional learning is interrupted. And so we know what happened during COVID, there was an interruption of learning in schools, especially in a manner that most of the world was not really prepared for. And we saw after some time that there was a need to adapt, and many states in Africa, including Kenya, including the DRC, did this by moving learning to platforms such as television, radio, newspapers, etc. So outside that setting of the school, we saw that with this adaptability in policies on education, education including CSE could begin to be offered remotely and online in some cases. There's obviously issues as to access. There are some situations where this enabled access to some adolescents who are outside of the school setting, but I also just have to state that there had to be intervention from partners, especially in the DRC, to urge government to just ensure that CSE is part and parcel of the education efforts that were being disseminated online. And then the third example in terms of, policies that we've seen enabling CSE is policies that support and enable planning and budgeting for the delivery of CSE, because they really do help to address some of the key issues that hamper access to CSE. I think, we've already had some in the discussions today, lack of financing for delivery of CSE, lack of resources, lack of training of teachers, etc. And so we've seen policies enabling budgeting for these items and more. And even though advocacy had to be, or advocacy was required to be able to realize this, for example, in Kenya, definitely having that policy basis was key to seeing some of this progress in terms of budgeting, etc. And more work remains to be done, but certainly, those are a few examples where we've seen policies enabling. But so very quickly, I want to just provide one or two examples where we've seen policies that have the potential to, but have not been able to enable access to CSE. And so, we've seen sexuality education that is reflected, or policies and frameworks that list being God-fearing among principles that govern development of the relevant CSE curriculums, and that should govern delivery of these CSE curriculums. We've seen this in Uganda, for example. You read one comment on Twitter that spoke about CSE curriculum focusing on heterosexual and heteronormative relationships only. And we've seen this in Uganda with these references to being God-fearing. And we've seen information being filtered into the curricula that also speaks to that, and therefore leaving out an entire group of persons. In Zambia, we've seen very concerning language in sexuality frameworks that really discuss or define inappropriate sexual behavior as including sex with someone of the same sex. And so this, focus on heterosexual sexuality, first of all, and then the castigation of same-sex interaction, we see leaves out an entire group of persons and puts us in a situation where we don't even begin to consider the CSE needs of these persons. And we have spoken about a little bit, how persons who are out of school are typically left out. But I just want to provide a very quick example about sexuality education policies that mostly focus on provision of CSE in schools, but then also do not consider the multiple and intersecting vulnerabilities that out-of-school adolescents might face. So based on their life experiences, based on their situation. So for example, adolescents in humanitarian settings who are out of school. So we know that these adolescents' SRHR needs are usually unmet. Due to the challenging context, we know that there's inadequate understanding of their SRHR needs because they're not consulted, but we see that despite the fact that there's a little bit of guidance in some places here and there about how to proceed. So for example, consult them on what their preferences are, provide comprehensive rather than piecemeal information in languages that they can interact with and they can understand, allow as much as possible flexibility and building in CSE into access to SRHR services, etc. In policy and in practice, quite often adolescents who are in humanitarian settings and out of school, we find are forgotten. And we've really documented this in countries, including Uganda. So those are just the few examples, Eunice, for us to reflect on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that it goes back to the importance of centering the young people, like young people's voices in the design and implementation of these programming. Because, for example, we have the example of Sophie and the work that they have been doing. It is possible to implement other type of out of school CSE programming. It is really possible to have young people leading the conversation and delivering like this important information. And I think that that is why it's super important to also put the resources in young people, because who is better to build youth-friendly information than us, right? Like who understands this better? So thank you so much for that, Betty. Now I have another question for the two of you, for Lita and Betty, regarding accountability mechanisms. What are some of the accountability mechanisms or strategies available at the national and regional levels to adolescents and young people's demands to access CSE? Lita, over to you.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Sí, efectivamente, recalcar y reconocer el potencial de la participación juvenil, y no solamente como ha estado pasando, digamos, en nuestro país, y quiero partir desde ahí de manera, si se quiere, utilitaria, incluso en la implementación de las medidas de no repetición establecidas por la Corte Constitucional, por la Corte Interamericana, perdón, en el caso Paola Guzmán Albarracín versus Ecuador, ¿no es cierto? Que es mandatoria la disposición de que en el proceso de revisión y de formulación de la política pública se incorporen las voces de las niñas, de las y de los adolescentes. Sin embargo, también asistimos a esta práctica, como digo, utilitaria de una mera consulta y del temor, quizá, pero sobre todo del desconocimiento y del desvalorizar esta participación juvenil. Y que, como digo, no necesariamente siempre está valorada en su real dimensión, con la potencia que tiene, y eso hace, sin duda alguna, que las políticas públicas y las respuestas de los estados no necesariamente respondan a estas necesidades, a estas diversas dimensiones, a estas intersecciones que habitan la vida cotidiana de las y de los adolescentes. En nuestro país hay espacios que están vinculados a la institucionalidad pública y en donde los jóvenes y las jóvenes pueden activar. Y hay los consejos consultivos, el Consejo Nacional para la Igualdad Intergeneracional, pero también hay espacios muy interesantes del movimiento juvenil, el movimiento Aborto Libre, el movimiento Por Ser Niña, pero creo que también es importante reconocer que esta misma práctica androcéntrica, adultocéntrica, capacitista, hace que se utilice, y quiero cerrar esta parte, como se utiliza la participación juvenil y las voces de jóvenes en espacios de decisión para decir que están incorporando esta voz. Y eso es lo que pasó en gobiernos anteriores, que se rompió el acuerdo juvenil, el acuerdo nacional juvenil, y para el movimiento de jóvenes en el Ecuador ha sido mucho más complejo reactivarse, mucho más ahora que asistimos a un gobierno de tinte absolutamente antiderechos, ¿no? Creemos también que es necesario que los estados cuenten con instituciones que puedan coordinar las políticas de juventud, pero también que puedan entender esta diferenciación, no cooptar, sino acompañar para que se pueda recoger este conocimiento de la realidad, para que se pueda impulsar el fortalecimiento de competencias para que se puedan ejecutar programas y políticas desde su mirada, desde su perspectiva, pero también para que se puedan desarrollar las capacidades de las y de los adolescentes y de la ciudadanía en general para tomarse los espacios, pero también ser parte activa de la toma de decisiones y de la opinión política. Creo yo que la participación juvenil se ejercita también en la vigilancia permanente del cumplimiento de las obligaciones del Estado. Y eso requiere también de que podamos percibir, advertir, mirar, estar siempre llevando a la mesa de discusión estas realidades, estos sentires y estos saberes que solamente les atraviesa a las y les jóvenes, de manera que tengan la posibilidad de impugnar, de cuestionar estos estereotipos, estas normas que están establecidas para que se puedan hacer estos cambios radicales. Como le decía, para las y los jóvenes de nuestro país y de la región en general, creo que una de las herramientas potentes para exigir y demandar la participación juvenil es justamente la sentencia del caso Paola Guzmán de la que hablaba al inicio. Tanto para exigir cómo acompañar en el diseño, en la implementación y también en la evaluación de la política pública en educación integral en sexualidad y por lo tanto materializar el derecho fundamental a la participación democrática que permiten la intervención de las y de los ciudadanos jóvenes en la conformación, en el ejercicio y en el control del poder político. En ese sentido, para abrir y para sostener estos espacios también nos corresponde al Estado, a la academia, a las agencias de cooperación, a las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, al mismo movimiento feminista, generar los espacios suficientes para sostener estos debates en torno a las demandas de los jóvenes, de los niños, de las adolescentes, especialmente aquellos relacionados a sus derechos sexuales y reproductivos desde una escucha absolutamente respetuosa y comprometida. Para nosotras la participación juvenil es vital porque tiene asidero, tiene cabida para evitar justamente los retrocesos en materia de derechos, como el derecho a la educación de calidad, a la educación sexual, a la salud, a maternar por elección, no por imposición, y esto último seriamente afectado en nuestro país, que acabamos de asistir ayer a un veto presidencial que restringe de manera total y que dejen desprotección a las niñas y a las y los adolescentes en condiciones de más vulnerabilidad a que puedan acceder a un aborto libre, seguro y gratuito. También a defender el derecho a la justicia, a que se judicialice y se justicialice las agresiones, las violaciones, también que aporte en la erradicación de la impunidad. Creemos también necesario que hay que en ese mismo sentido, fortalecer, afirmar esta interseccionalidad, esta interculturalidad, esta plurinacionalidad que nos habita para revalorizar estas identidades diversas que habitan en nuestros países. Para cerrar, solamente decir que tanto al movimiento juvenil como al movimiento feminista nos toca seguir activando todos los espacios en donde podamos interactuar, demandar, exigir, impugnar, rendir cuentas para poder implementar respuestas y normativas que efectivamente garanticen los derechos de todas y de todes.
Muchas gracias, Lita. I don't have the reactions button, but I would for sure would have put like a heart there. Thank you so much for your words. And yes, we agree totally with what you have shared. We really think that tokenism really affects young people's participation, and for like we can be there and we can be at the forefront of the battle, but if the spaces are not youth friendly and if stakeholders are not willing to shift the power dynamics, then young people are not going to succeed as we would want to. Betty, over to you.
Thanks, Eunice. So let me first start by saying that I think accountability for CSE will be more effective, should be more effective if it takes on a multi-sectoral approach. So we have to address several aspects when we're doing our work around accountability or supporting work around accountability. And that calls for looking into and challenging or engaging on the cultural aspects, the technical aspects, some of the operational aspects that many of us have alluded to today in the conversations that we're having. From our experience, one of the ways to seek accountability for implementation of CSE has been through engaging on technical aspects with the key government ministries that are involved in operationalizing CSE. So ministries of health, ministries of education, but organizing really around finding out how these ministries are organized, who are the key persons, what are the key technical working groups that are working on various aspects of CSE, and then engaging them on the aspects including on content of the curricula, on training of teachers, and really facilitating teachers and other persons supporting delivery of CSE to be able to be effective. I think that young people can also engage with relevant parliamentary committees, national human rights institutions. This is part of the work that we typically do a lot at the center with our partners to push and demand for accountability, especially where we have national human rights institutions that are very strong, and parliamentary health committees that parliamentary education committees that are willing to collaborate with citizens and young people in asking and demanding accountability from persons who find themselves in the executives and have duties to just ensure the rollout and implementation of CSE. And as Saja mentions, the background that can really support this kind of work is engaging these persons on the importance of CSE and what CSE really is, to get them to a point where they understand it enough to be able to make those moves in terms of accountability. And then because we see a very direct link between how CSE looks at national levels and these aspects of regional human rights instruments that I mentioned earlier, engaging treaty monitoring bodies during reviews of countries for those treaties that speak to aspects of CSE could be an avenue of shedding light on and challenging countries' actions, and I guess inadequate inactions as they relate to recognition of, protection of, realization of CSE. And really the recommendations that emerge from these processes we have found form a really strong foundation for us to go back home with to national levels and advocate for implementation that would really better the situations that we have challenged or that have been reviewed. And these are all processes that, as I mentioned, the center and some of our partners have engaged in. If anybody would like us to, share more information on specifics, we always are available to do that. And we've already spoken about using courts and litigation, so I'm not going to belabor, but just to say that, they're a really good way of securing binding decisions. And I don't want to take away from what has been said, but just to say that I agree completely. And we've seen that in our, in our context as well. But I guess just to support and put a little bit more of oomph behind what's being spoken about in this conversation today that we're having, that is curated and that is led by young people, is that we really cannot continue to speak about young people taking a part in accountability for CSE if we don't do our part as adult advocates and change the way we've been engaging with the accountability mechanisms and the way we've been functioning with them in our work of pursuing accountability. And so first and foremost, I feel that we have to be committed to consulting with young people on how they want to be brought into these spaces. The other thing that we have to do is we have to make sure that we make a real effort in providing them with real opportunities to engage, but also real resources that will allow them to engage in these spaces. We have to definitely cede space to them, but we also have to just ensure that we're seeding real interactions to them so that they're able to be effective in seeking or pursuing accountability. And as persons who have over time worked with, varied accountability mechanisms, learned how some of these accountability mechanisms are working, I think we have some work to do with the mechanisms themselves, just to ensure that when young people interface with them, they're able to be received and heard as we have been over the years. as advocates in their own right and as advocates of their own experiences. And, you know, to end on what Sophia referenced, we really need to be, you know, truly committed to this. Otherwise, I'm afraid that we won't see real change. So let me stop there. I hope those few insights are useful, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much, Betty. And yes, we totally agree with you. And we can see, of course, how also the litigation is useful. For example, we have, thank you very much, Supreme Court of Justice from Mexico, for including comprehensive sexuality education as a pillar of the right to choose over your own body. For example, there is a decision on that. So we can really see the impact on that. So now for the closing part of this amazing panel that we have had, we are going to have one last speaker, and then we're gonna have Maria from the Youth Coalition sharing a graphic recording that she has been preparing for this session. So stay tuned until the end. Thank you so much. Right now, I would like to introduce Dr. Carla Bertichewski to share her perspective on how to ensure youth participation in decision-making processes and why it is important to create safe spaces for young people to share their expertise and perspectives. By the way, we appreciate Mexico's permanent mission at the UN for co-sponsoring these events. And now I'm going to introduce Dr. Carla Bertichewski. She's the Director General at the National Center of Gender Equity and Reproductive Health of Mexico. She's trained as a medical doctor at National Autonomous University of Mexico and holds a master's in public health in developing countries from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She has 20 years of experience in sexual and reproductive health programming and policy design initiatives in Mexico and Latin America and the Caribbean region. She has led both qualitative and quantitative research and has also conducted projects in health communications advocacy and multi-sector partnership building. Since May 2019, she's the head of the National Center for Gender Equity and Reproductive Health at the Mexico Ministry of Health. So I now over to you, Dr. Carla, for the closing remarks on this panel. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Eunice, muchas gracias por la cortés presentación. Primero que nada, y a nombre del Gobierno de México, quisiera reconocer este espacio y sobre todo al Centro de Derechos Reproductivos y a la Coalición de Jóvenes por la Salud Sexual y Reproductiva por convocarnos a este espacio y por habilitar estos espacios en donde realmente se ve reflejada incluso en la estructura del panel cómo tenemos la intención desde algunos gobiernos, como es el de México, de centrar las necesidades de personas adolescentes y personas jóvenes en el centro de las políticas gubernamentales para atender sobre todo los temas de salud sexual y reproductiva, pero mucho más allá de esto en el marco de esta comisión por los derechos sociales, por la condición jurídica de las mujeres, realmente en un marco de políticas género transformadoras, porque estos temas van mucho más allá de los esfuerzos de la educación integral en sexualidad, de la salud sexual y reproductiva, sino de lo que representa esto para empoderar a las adolescentes, las jóvenes en toda su diversidad para realmente crear entornos de desarrollo social y humano que nos favorezcan a todas y todos. Y quisiera hacer primero un comentario sobre cómo vemos los abordajes contemporáneos en torno a las juventudes, en donde se considera que niñas, niños y adolescentes realmente gozan de una autonomía que está sustentada en la libertad individual y en la capacidad de las y los individuos para regular sus propios derechos y obligaciones. Esta autonomía progresiva, por ende, permite que se disfruten de estos derechos y obligaciones, pero también se ejerzan. y está relacionada con los derechos humanos y, por supuesto, para lograr el disfrute más alto posible de la salud sexual y reproductiva, es necesario crear y habilitar espacios y mecanismos para respetar estas decisiones informadas y libres de acuerdo a la madurez que tiene la persona en la adolescencia, etapa dentro de la cual padres, madres o tutores, pero instituciones educativas, de salud, de múltiples sectores del desarrollo social, así como las instancias comunitarias y sociales, fungimos como facilitadoras y facilitadores de estos espacios que deben ser espacios democráticos de decisión y de participación para las y los jóvenes en el pleno ejercicio de sus derechos. Reconocemos también que este grupo de edad ha enfrentado el mayor rezago en acceso a, por ejemplo, servicios de educación integral en sexualidad, en la posibilidad de tener información específica y atención a sus necesidades, reconociendo la diversidad de condiciones sociales y económicas, culturales y de género que inciden de manera importante en ello. Y por eso la relevancia de un espacio como el que tenemos posibilidad de tener este día, escuchando, por ejemplo, a Sofía y a reto de poder centrarse y de escuchar cuáles son estas necesidades y partir de la ruptura de quizá las preconcepciones que tenemos cuando nos acercamos a trabajar con personas jóvenes, creyendo incluso que el símbolo como el pañuelo verde representa lo mismo para nosotras y nosotros que estamos encargados de implementar un proyecto, de desarrollar una política, y para personas jóvenes esto puede ser un símbolo enteramente distinto y hasta no sentarnos a escuchar y a entender cuál es la diversidad de los factores que están interactuando para atender un problema particular, y como lo explicaba Sofía, pues aquí las particularidades eran más bien sobre las vías de emancipación de estas jóvenes con las que se estaba trabajando. Hasta no entender eso, no podemos desarrollar estas políticas que estén realmente centradas en sus necesidades y atenderles en la diversidad que representan las y los jóvenes del mundo, no nada más en lo que nos presentaba Sofía en este contexto de México. Por ejemplo, Sajan nos presenta sobre Nepal la posibilidad de entender esta diversidad no solo desde la perspectiva de las personas jóvenes, sino de quienes interactúan en fortalecer esta educación integral en sexualidad, partiendo siquiera de las complejidades que tienen educadores y educadoras alrededor de este tema y cómo trabajar de una forma conjunta. Y finalmente, en la voz de Amanda, reconocer esta gran fuerza que existe desde el poder de la juventud organizada para pues trabajar alrededor de las políticas que pueden ser conservadoras, que pueden estar vetando una visión que está centrada en derechos, y la importancia de no subestimar el poder de las y los jóvenes para lograr que los derechos se vean plasmados en las políticas y que se vean respetados. Creo que para cerrar mi intervención es muy importante reconocer estas peticiones que se hacen desde las voces de las jóvenes que están representadas el día de hoy, para garantizar que se implementen verdaderos mecanismos de escucha, no solamente de reconocimiento hacia las peticiones que se hacen desde grupos de jóvenes, sino de que los acuerdos que se toman cuando se dan estos espacios realmente se lleven a la implementación en cuanto a la integración en las políticas y en la toma de decisión con esta visión del aprendizaje a través de las y los jóvenes y de rendir cuentas sobre estos procesos. No es solamente sentarles a la mesa, como se dijo, es sentarles a la mesa para implementar un plan de trabajo que incluso lleva a incluir el financiamiento de la participación de las y los jóvenes para realmente ver plasmadas sus voces de una forma participativa real en el diseño, la implementación y la evaluación de programas a todos los niveles. Reconozco este espacio como uno de estos esfuerzos que sería suficiente y significativo y me llevo el compromiso a nombre del Gobierno de México de seguir generando estos espacios y facilitando la participación y la voz de personas jóvenes como una verdadera intención de centrar las políticas en las necesidades y en la visión de las y los jóvenes. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación. Es un placer haber estado aquí y el compromiso es no solo del Gobierno de México, sino de manera personal en seguir trabajando para tener políticas que respondan realmente a estas necesidades y a la visión de las y los jóvenes.
Muchas gracias, Carla. And just for you to know, like if you can type your questions and like your questions in the question and answer box, we will review them later and we can do something with that. And just to close the space, I want to give the floor to a person that has been really designing all of this space, who has put a lot of love into this event. And she's not very visible at many times, but she's an amazing colleague, and she's one of the reasons why we are here today. And like these efforts are mainly led by her, Maria from the Youth Coalition. Over to you, my love. Maria is our program manager and comms manager, and she's gonna be sharing the graphic recording that she's been putting together for this amazing event.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I'm going to share my screen briefly to show you how I've been synthesizing everything that has been said. And the idea of this is to do it in a youth-friendly way and to be able to visualize what everyone has said. So of course, this is my subjective reading of what has been said in this space, but I can walk you through it. First, I wanted to make a lot of emphasis on how young activists advocate for youth-friendly, comprehensive sexuality education. And here I've input a lot of what everyone has shared. We've talked about pleasure, we've talked about taking an intersectional approach, we've talked about avoiding the trappings of white feminism, about creating enabling environments and targeting adult gatekeepers, targeting religious leaders, and about organizing and making alliances, intergenerational alliances to change policies. We've also talked about how adults can be good allies. And this is in the words of young people. We're going to be sharing this image if you want to consult it later. But here are a few ideas on how adults can support young people who are activists and who are at the forefront of fighting for CSE. And finally, we've talked about the ways in which public policy can facilitate access to CSE and the things that we need to keep in mind, the things that we're missing, and the people that are also missing from these public policies. So we will be sharing this on our social media, and we hope you enjoyed this space and that this reflects on what has been said in another way.
Thank you so much for that, Maria. And for the audience, if you go to our Twitter account, the Youth Coalition's Twitter account, that is, I'm gonna paste it here in the chat box. It's at Youth Coalition. We have some questions that we have put there for you in our Twitter, that you can see, where you can interact with the panelists and with the organizations that have created this event. These questions are around what are your perceptions of what young people have shared today? And you can answer directly in the Twitter chat so that we can learn from you as well, and so that we can know what are your perspectives on what we discussed today. And I don't think that we have anything else to say or to share. I just want to thank all the panelists, Sophie, Amanda, and Saya. Thank you so much for your time and for your expertise and for coming here super early, 6 in the morning for Sophie today. So thank you so much for everything. Thank you so much to Lita and Betty for being here with us as well. And thank you so much, Dr. Carla. And I just want to say thank you again to the Center for Reproductive Rights for being such good allies and for allowing us to take the lead on this panel. It really helped us to shift the power dynamics that affect young people's participation. And stay tuned in our social media. So thank you very much, everyone. And thank you so much to our amazing interpreters for everything.